Sometimes when I tell my friends that I'll be visiting a new city, they like to give me recommendations for good restaurants that I should dine at while I'm there. Now, the problem with that is that what they consider to be a good restaurant isn't always what I would consider to be a good restaurant. So, in this video, I'm going to explain what I consider to be a good restaurant. Now, I have a very simple rule for this. A restaurant is good if it has good food, good value, and good atmosphere. So, a good restaurant is a restaurant that has good food and good value and a good atmosphere. So, this is not that different from the rules that we might learn in our law school classes about whether someone's guilty of a crime or liable for a tort or whether a law is constitutional. This is my rule for determining whether a restaurant is good. And I want my friends to know about this rule so that they stop recommending restaurants that I don't consider to be good restaurants. Now, I say that this is not that different from the legal rules because it's just a test, right? It's just like the tests that we learn in our law school classes. In this case, it's an elements test. There are 3 elements that have to be satisfied to establish a good restaurant: good food, good value, and good atmosphere. All right. So element 1 is that the element 1 of the test for whether a restaurant is a good restaurant is it has to have good food. Right? Element 2 is that the restaurant must provide good value. And then element 3 is that the restaurant must have a good atmosphere. All right. Now, in the same way that whether a restaurant is good can seem rather subjective, these elements of the good rule, of the good restaurant rule, can also seem rather subjective. Okay. So the first element of a good restaurant is good food. But what makes food good, right? So this is kind of subjective too. And likewise, a good restaurant under this rule provides good value. But how do you know whether you're getting a good value? And what makes good atmosphere? All right, so we have question marks next to all of these elements. So we have a test for what makes something a good restaurant. It has to have good food, good value, and good atmosphere. But what makes good food? And what makes good value? And what makes good atmosphere? All right, so here, just like in our law school classes, we may actually learn about some additional rules that can help clarify these elements for us. So let's say that good food is not just a subjective test. Good food, at least according to my rule, is food that is either spicy or healthy. If it's either one of those things, I consider it good food. That's because I like spicy food and I also like healthy food. So if it's either spicy or healthy, then we'll consider this to be good food. How about good value? Well, let's say that good value is a balance of price and quantity. And then good atmosphere is, well, if the restaurant is both clean and comfortable. All right, so now we have some additional sub-rules that are going to help us with our main rule of whether a restaurant is a good restaurant. Again, we had different elements for this good restaurant rule, and now we have some rules that help define each of those elements. Good value, well, that's balance of price and quantity. Good atmosphere, clean and comfortable. Now, these additional sub-rules are tests in and of themselves, right? So the good food rule is spicy or healthy. Okay, so our test for a good restaurant requires us to first determine whether the restaurant has good food. And to do that, we now know that we can apply another test that says food is good if it is either spicy or healthy. So this is another elements test, but this one is a disjunctive elements test because unlike the good restaurant rule, right? The good restaurant rule required all of these elements to be satisfied. Good food and good value and good atmosphere. The test for good food is a little bit different. The test for good food only requires that one of the elements be satisfied. Food is good if it's either spicy or healthy. It doesn't have to be both spicy and healthy. All right, and then let's jump to the test for good atmosphere first. We'll come back to good value in just a minute. Good atmosphere is another elements test, but this time we have a conjunctive elements test. All of the elements must be satisfied, right? And I'll just point out that that's the kind of elements test that the good restaurant rule was too. This was also a conjunctive elements test because we needed good food and good value and good atmosphere. All of those had to be satisfied. So the good atmosphere test also requires that all of the elements be satisfied. It must be clean and it must be comfortable. Right? So we had a disjunctive elements test for good food. It needs to be either spicy or healthy. Just one of the elements needed to be satisfied. The good atmosphere test, on the other hand, is a conjunctive elements test. We needed all of the elements to be satisfied, clean and comfortable. And our overall good restaurant test was also a conjunctive elements test. It needed good food and good value and good atmosphere. All right, and then finally, the test for good value, that second one that we skipped, this one is a balance of price and quantity. Now, this one is actually not an elements test. We can certainly check that the restaurant's food has some price, of course, and we can see that there is some quantity of food that is provided. But the way to determine whether a restaurant provides good value is not to apply a disjunctive elements test where we only need to have one of them satisfied, price or quantity. And it's not a conjunctive elements test where we have to have both price and quantity. And that makes sense if we sort of think about what a balance is. Every item on a menu is going to have a price, even if that price is 0. And every item on the menu is going to have some quantity, right? Again, even if that quantity is 0. So simply asking whether each menu item has a price or has a quantity doesn't really help us, okay? The way to apply this test is to balance those features against each other. So even if the price is low, food is not really a good value if you only get a tiny, tiny, minuscule amount, right? So $1 might seem like a good price, but if all you get is an ice cube and a packet of salt, well, then that's not a good value. And then the opposite is also true. Just because the price is high doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good value. So the price could be high. Let's say it's $100 for a single menu item. That might seem expensive, but it might still be a good value if, say, it includes 100 pounds of caviar and truffle oil with gold flakes on it, right? So the test for good value is not an elements test at all. It's what we call a balancing test, or sometimes it's also called a factor test, where multiple factors are weighed against one another. All right, so let's say that this test for whether a restaurant is a good restaurant is a rule that we learned in one of our law school classes. And we've also now learned about these sub-rules that help us determine whether the individual elements of the good restaurant rule are satisfied. Okay, so then on the exam, the professor may describe some hypothetical restaurant to us and then ask us to analyze whether that hypothetical restaurant is a good restaurant under this rule. So how would we do that? Okay, the way that we would do that is to use the IRAC method. IRAC. Now, if you aren't yet familiar with IRAC, it's simply an acronym, and it's just referring to the 4 components of legal analysis. The first is issue, the second is rule, and then the analysis, or sometimes called the application, and the conclusion. All right, so if you look at the first letter of each of those components, that's where we get IRAC from. Okay, so that's our IRAC form. So the issue, remember in this hypothetical exam question where the professor asked us, hey, I'm going to describe a restaurant to you. Is this a good restaurant? Well, that's our issue. The issue is simply the legal question that was asked. In this case, the question is whether some hypothetical restaurant is a good restaurant. All right. Now, the rule is the legal test or the law that helps us determine the answer to that legal question. Okay, so if our question was, is this a good restaurant? Well, the rule is a good restaurant is a restaurant that has good food and good value and good atmosphere. That's our rule in IRAC. All right. The analysis is our explanation of how the various elements of that rule are or are not satisfied. And then finally, our conclusion, that's just the result. The restaurant is or is not a good restaurant after we apply the rule. Okay, so as we'll see, the most important part of our IRAC framework is the A, the analysis. Right? And that's because the analysis is where we explain how and why that test is satisfied, how and why this rule is satisfied. And we don't just show that we can memorize and restate the rule, right? Because then the exam would just say, what is the rule? The analysis is going to show that we understand how that rule applies to a given circumstance. And as you might have guessed, the analysis actually includes several different analyses, right? One for each of these elements. All right, so the separate elements that make up the overall rule also have to be analyzed, each one separately. Okay, so we'll have a little sub-analysis of whether the first element is satisfied. And we'll have another little sub-analysis of whether the second element, good value, is satisfied. And then we'll have a third little sub-analysis of whether the final element of the rule, good atmosphere, is satisfied. So let's start sketching this out. Okay, so let's see what our answer would look like on this exam question. All right, so the issue is whether a given restaurant is a good restaurant. And on an exam, we can just identify that issue by simply providing a heading that indicates the question we are trying to answer. Is this a good restaurant? All right, so once we give that heading, that's good enough. All that's done is just identified what the issue is that we're trying to address. All right, then the next component of IRAC is the rule. So let's state the rule next. A restaurant is a good restaurant if it has good food, good value, and a good atmosphere. All right, so much for our rule statement. All right, so that just identifies what our rule is for this issue of good restaurant. Okay, so now here is where our IRAC form gets fun. All right, because now we're about to get into our A, our analysis. This is, like I said, the most important part, right? But each of these little sub-analyses, one for good food, one for good value, and one for good atmosphere, each one of those little sub-analyses is also its own IRAC analysis, right? Each one of those sub-IRACs also follows the IRAC form. So let's identify the issues. Let's identify the issues for each of those sub-analyses, right? Good food, good value, and good atmosphere. All right, so we will include another heading for each of those sub-issues. Good food, good food, not good food photo. Good value. And good atmosphere. All right, and remember I said that each of these sub-analyses will follow the IRAC form too. So after we identify the issue, we need to provide the rule. So let's state those rules now. Okay, the rule for good food is that food is good if it is, what did we say? Food is good if it is spicy or healthy, right? So that's the rule for our good food sub-issue. For good value, we said that food has good value if it has a good balance of price and quantity. And the good atmosphere rule. A restaurant has good atmosphere if it is both clean and comfortable. So a restaurant, I guess we don't need to underline that. A restaurant has good atmosphere if it is both clean and comfortable. Okay, so we see that we have started our IRAC for each of these sub-issues as well. All right, so now that we've identified the sub-issues, good food, good value, and good atmosphere for our overall good restaurant test, and we've given the rules for each of those sub-issues, now we're ready to begin our analysis of each one. So let's tackle the good food sub-issue first. All right, it's the first one. Let's tackle that one first. Now, we said that food is good if it is either spicy or healthy. But what do we have here? We have even more sub-issues. So we need to determine whether the food is spicy and whether it is healthy. Right? Now, the test for good food, actually, it only requires one of these things to be true. But in our exam answer, we should analyze both. And here again, we use the IRAC framework. So let's give ourselves another subheading for each of these disjunctive elements. Okay, so one for spicy, and one for healthy. Okay, so we can drill down even deeper. The next step would be to identify the rules for each of these sub-issues. But in this case, we don't have any more rules to help us break these elements down. There's no rule or definition that tells us what makes food spicy, right? This is it. These are all the rules that we had time to learn in our law school class. And there's no rule or definition for what makes food healthy either. Okay, so in that case, when you don't have a rule, then really the rule is just your common sense. Okay, there's no rule or definition for what makes food spicy or what makes food healthy. So we just then proceed to the analysis and we use the facts of the hypothetical circumstance that the professor has given us on the exam to help us explain why we think the food should be appropriately considered spicy or healthy. So let's take a look at the menu and see if we can figure that out. All right, so here's our menu. And if we look at all of these items here on the menu, we see that this restaurant only sells salads. All right, so we have, looks like about 10 or so salads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 salads. Okay, and we're trying to determine whether there is spicy or healthy food that is offered at this restaurant. Well, let's start with the spicy. All right, I'll notice here that one of the salads is called the spicy Thai peanut salad, right? And it comes with spicy Thai peanut dressing. There's also this Southwestern salad that includes a spicy Southwestern dressing. But there's nothing else here that really seems to be appropriately considered spicy. I mean, avocado, berries, spinach, bacon, avocado again, carrots, tomatoes, green onion, I guess. I mean, that's kind of pushing it. Some people might consider onions, red onion and green onion, to be kind of spicy, I suppose, but not really. Okay, so on the whole, it seems like there aren't too many spicy options. And so if we wanted to say that this restaurant had spicy food, I guess we'd have to be saying that even if you just have a couple of items that are spicy, then it still has spicy food, which I guess is okay. But then again, another way of thinking about this is what makes the spicy Thai peanut salad spicy is the spicy Thai peanut dressing. And what makes the Southwestern salad spicy is the spicy Southwestern dressing. Couldn't we maybe ask the restaurant, hey, I want to get the Chinese chicken salad, but could I get the spicy Southwestern salad dressing on it? And if I did that, suddenly this Chinese chicken salad would also be spicy. And actually, I could do that with any of these salads. I could ask to put that spicy dressing on any of these. So really, all of the food could be spicy if you wanted. We just have to put the dressing on it. But then again, that seems a little bit strange too, because if that were the rule, if that's how you figure out whether food is spicy, well, then all the restaurant would have to do is just include, a packet of hot sauce and say, well, yeah, you can put this on whatever you want. So therefore, we have spicy food. And that seems kind of strange too. Now, again, this is all about how you explain what the answer is. The answer itself isn't really that important. That's not the thing that's going to end up mattering as much as your explanation. All right. Let's do the same thing for. Well, actually, let's write this out first. All right. Let's write this out first. So let's go back to. Let's go back to our answer here for spicy. And as I said, we don't have a rule for spicy, so we'll just dive right into our analysis. Okay. Now, the first way that food can be spicy, or excuse me, that can be good, is by being spicy. All right. And then we will use the facts from our actual hypothetical scenario to help explain why we think it is or is not spicy in this restaurant. So here, some of the menu items have chili. So for example, we saw the spicy Thai peanut salad includes spicy Thai peanut dressing. Also, there was that southwestern salad. Comes with spicy southwestern dressing. Okay? And there's no reason to think that either of these spicy salad dressings could not also be added to any of the other salads. So really, any of the salads could be spicy because we have two spicy dressings that are available. But remember I said, that's kind of funny. Because if by that logic, then any restaurant would be spicy, any food would be spicy as long as there's a bottle of hot sauce within arm's reach. All right. So let's explain that counter view also. We might say, maybe I'll skip a line here. On the other hand, out of the 9 menu items, only 2 actually include anything spicy. And the spicy dressings would likely only be served with those 2 items. Now, the spicy dressings are not listed as options for all of them. And even if they were, the logic that, how did we say? The logic that anything can be spicy if it has spicy dressing. The logic that anything can be spicy if it has spicy dressing added to it would mean that everything is spicy, since you could always add spicy dressing to anything. All right. So I think this is a pretty good explanation of why, in the end, we think, no, it's not really spicy food. Okay. So because only 2 items on the entire list mention anything about spice, the food in general would probably not be considered spicy. All right. By the way, this is our conclusion. Remember in the IRAC form, we start with the issue, then we give the rule, the analysis, and our conclusion. Well, we're following that form. Here's the I. We skipped the rule. There was no rule here because, well, there's no rule that was given. So we proceeded directly to the analysis, where we used the facts from the fact pattern, right, from the hypothetical situation that was given by the professor, to then try to explain why we think the food in this case is or is not spicy. And then we end with our conclusion. Our conclusion was, well, no, probably not. Probably wouldn't be considered spicy. All right. Now we can do the same thing for our healthy element. All right, so let's go back to our menu. And again, these are all salads. That's pretty good. I mean, generally we think of salads as being healthy, right? So all the items, they have green leafy ingredients in them. All right, so and fresh carrots, fresh cucumbers, vegetables. Okay, usually green leafy things and vegetables, they're healthier. They have higher vitamin content. But interestingly, most of the ingredient lists, they only show vegetables as like a second or third ingredient. Like look at this chicken Caesar salad. It starts with chicken breast and then Parmesan cheese and then croutons, and then after that, then they mention some romaine lettuce and then Caesar dressing, which has a lot of fat and calories on it. The spinach and bacon one's even better. The first ingredient is bacon and then egg. All right, we've got more chicken here. Cheese, peanuts, more chicken. All right, so some might arguably say that, if we're giving the list of ingredients and the vegetables only come as a second or third ingredient after something very unhealthy like bacon or cheese, then even if they include vegetables, they may not actually be considered very healthy overall. Just because something has vegetables in it doesn't mean that it's healthy. Okay, I mean, I can put a piece of lettuce on top of a piece of cake and then say, haha, it has vegetables. It must be healthy, right? And the answer, of course, is no. All right, so let's go back to our document and then write that out too. All right, so remember, the first way the food can be good is by being spicy. It can also be good by being healthy, right? So the second way that food can be good food is by being healthy. Here, all of the menu items are salads. And they all have green leafy vegetables in them. Green leafy as we said, usually vegetables are healthy and have higher vitamin content. But most of the ingredient lists only show vegetables. Let's give ourselves a little more room here. As a second or third item after something unhealthy, like bacon or cheese. Remember that? So even though they include vegetables, they may not actually be considered very healthy overall. Just because something has vegetables doesn't mean that it's healthy. Right? I gave that example of putting a piece of lettuce or a piece of spinach on top of a cake. All right, so here we're following the IRAC form again. We have the I. We are identifying the issue is, hey, does this restaurant have healthy food? We had no rule that helps us answer the question of whether food is healthy, so we proceeded directly to the analysis. And then here again, we are explaining using the specific facts from the hypothetical situation given to us to explain why we think that it is or is not healthy food. And then we have to end with our conclusion, right? So because the food at the restaurant is neither spicy nor healthy, it is not good food. All right? Okay, so we gave our analyses for spicy and for healthy, but the reason we were analyzing whether the food was spicy and healthy was because ultimately we wanted to figure out whether the food was good. That's what we're trying to figure out here. So the question that we need to answer then is the food good? Now we said that it's probably not considered spicy and it's not really healthy. So that's why we said, well, it's neither spicy nor healthy, so it's not good food, right? But what was the reason that we cared about good food? Because that was one of the elements of the good restaurant rule. The good restaurant rule. So Now we want to then move on to our next element of the good restaurant rule. Now you might be saying, okay, well, if a restaurant has to have good food and good value and good atmosphere to be a good restaurant, once we figured out that it doesn't have good food, can't we just stop? Well, yes, technically, a good restaurant requires all of these things. And so if one of these things is not satisfied, it's not a good restaurant. But remember I said that on an exam, we're going to walk through all of the elements and do an analysis for all of these to give a complete answer. Otherwise, you might be tempted to just say, a restaurant is a good restaurant if it has good food, good value, and good atmosphere. It doesn't have good food, so I'm done. Well, if you did that, you wouldn't really be doing a good job of demonstrating to the professor that you understand how to analyze the good value element and how to analyze the good atmosphere element. So remember, the conclusion itself is sort of beside the point. What we really care about is your ability to explain how you reach the conclusion for each one. So let's move down to good value. Food has good value. And you know what you could do is you could say, assuming, for the sake of argument, that the food is good, however, the next element of the good restaurant rule is requires that the food provide a good value. All right, and then we can give our rule for the good value element. Food has good value if it has a good balance of price and quantity. All right, and then we're going to use again our specific facts from the fact pattern to try to explain why we think there is a good balance between price and quantity here. So let's go back to our menu once more. All right, looks like the salads all on this menu are all $3, which is remarkably affordable, especially these days. And you know, I'd say that's a low price for most meals in American restaurants just in general. And now we don't know exactly how big the salads are, right? So if it's a $3 salad, but you only get one bite, then maybe that's not such a good value after all. So we don't know exactly how big the salads are, but they all seem to include a lot of ingredients, right? At least 7 or 8 ingredients, right? This one looks like the shortest one, and it still has carrots, cucumbers, grape tomatoes, avocados, house-made croutons, mixed greens. So that's pretty good, right? So you're getting a good number of ingredients. And then there's a picture here that shows that the salad is, well, it's at least middling size. In fact, this actually looks smaller, like the picture has been shrunk a little bit. So it's probably even bigger than this. Okay, so on balance, this is probably good value. $3, you get all these numbers of ingredients. It's at least a middling size, more like a side salad size, but still for $3, that's not too bad. All right, so maybe that's what our analysis will be. Food has a good value if it has a good balance of price and quantity. Right here, now you may have noticed I use this word here a lot. Here is just telling the reader I'm about to apply that rule to our circumstances here. Here, the salads on the menu are all $3. Not bad. All right, it's a low price for most meals in American restaurants. And though we don't know exactly how big they are, we don't know how big the salads are, they all seem to include many ingredients, right? And just on average, I'd say at least around 7 or 8 at minimum, right, for each salad. And then there was one other bit of information that we thought was helpful, right? And that was that the picture shows that the salad is at least middling size. Right? It's not huge, but it didn't look like it was tiny either. So, okay, so on balance, this is probably a good value. Right? Here again, we're closing out this little sub-IRAC with a conclusion. All right, so good value is our issue. The next element requires the food provide good value. Food has good value if it has a good balance of price and quantity. What is that? That is the R, the rule of our IRAC. And then here is our analysis. And then we end with our conclusion. So you see this IRAC framework is still very much in play even for these sub-issues. All right, last but not least, the good atmosphere rule. All right, so let's give ourselves a little transition here. And finally, the last element of a good restaurant is good atmosphere. Oh, I was about to write the rule, but I forgot we already have it here. A restaurant has good atmosphere if it is both clean and comfortable. All right, if it's both clean and comfortable. All right, so here's our issue, good atmosphere. Here's our rule, clean and comfortable. This is an elements test, remember, so it has to be both clean and comfortable. So what's going to happen next? Our analysis. But our analysis actually requires us to analyze two more sub-issues, clean and comfortable. All right, so let's go back to our facts. Now, we're not going to really be able to see whether a restaurant is clean or comfortable by looking at the menu. But what we could do is maybe take a look at a picture of the restaurant. All right, so what do we see? It does look pretty bright, right? The floors are polished. The tablecloths appear to be pressed and not a crumb on them, right? Very bright colors, no stains. Look at the windows, spotless. Yeah, everything that you would want in a nice, clean restaurant. Except there's one thing that kind of makes us wonder, and that's this guy right here. There is what appears to be a very large rodent, a rat, on top of one of the tables. All right, now that's not a really good sign. Now, I mean, it looks like a pretty clean rat, I suppose, as far as rats go, but what's the problem with rats? Rats are associated with disease and infestation and germs, right? And they tend to congregate in places where there are lots of dirty things, garbage, trash, pieces of food that have not been picked up. So I don't know, we have some bits of information that kind of give us conflicting views. On the one hand, it looks very clean. Again, let's use the specific facts. The tablecloths look nice and pressed with bright colors. The floors are polished. The windows are spotless. There isn't any stray food or dirty dishes lying around anywhere. That would seem to weigh in favor of saying that this is a clean restaurant. But the rat makes us feel like, maybe there's something that we're not noticing that is, sort of hidden away, and that this rat is showing that actually this restaurant is not as clean as we would like. Now, what do you think? Do you think this is a clean restaurant or not a clean restaurant? Well, that would be your conclusion. But remember, the conclusion itself doesn't really matter all that much. What is more important is how we explain why this could be a clean restaurant or not a clean restaurant. So let's go back here to our analysis, and we say, in order for the atmosphere to be good, it has to be both clean and comfortable. Now, do we have a rule for what makes a restaurant clean? We don't. Just to double check, let's go back up to the top to all of our rules here. We have a rule for good restaurant, for good food, good value, and good atmosphere. We don't have a definition for clean. So just like for spicy and healthy, we're just going to proceed directly to our analysis. And we're going to give some explanations for why we think this is and is not a clean restaurant. All right, so here, the interior of the restaurant appears tidy and neat. And the tablecloths are nicely pressed. There are no stains on the tables. The floors are polished. And there are no spots on the windows. The room is well lit. And there appears to be no clutter anywhere. So on the surface, the restaurant certainly appears to be quite clean. However, there is a large rat on one of the tables. And as most people know, rats are associated with filth and disease because they are often attracted to garbage and strewn about food. And so here's our explanation for the reasons for why one might consider it to be clean, and also why one might consider it to be not clean. And then in the end, we will finally give a conclusion, right? Because looks can be deceiving, the rat on the table, well, let's say it differently. How about we just say, looks can be deceiving. The rat on the table strongly suggests that there is some dirtiness about the restaurant that just may not be apparent from the photo. Therefore, the restaurant is probably not very clean. All right, so here's our conclusion for this clean element. But we've got one more to go. One more to go, right? We have to analyze whether this restaurant is comfortable. And for that, we once again go back and we look for the specific facts. I can't emphasize that enough. We really can't just jump into our conclusion and say, yeah, I think it's comfortable. Because that's just jumping to the conclusion. We must explain, and in order to explain why you think something is or is not satisfied, we have to use the actual pieces of information that are here. All right, so what makes something comfortable? Well, we don't have a rule for that, so let's just use our common sense. There are chairs next to each restaurant, or next to each table. That's always nice. And there appear to be cushions on those chairs. They have backs on the chairs. I don't know if you've ever tried eating while sitting at a stool. That's a little less comfortable because you have to kind of sit up really, really straight. What else? It's well lit. We already mentioned that, but that fact could be relevant to being comfortable also. If you try to eat in a very dimly lit restaurant, it's not very comfortable. It's kind of hard to see what you're doing, right? Now, on the other hand, the floors look kind of hard. I don't know how much that matters. And the chairs, well, they're not, and they have a cushion on the bottom, but it's got kind of a straight, hard wooden back. Some people like to have armrests for their chairs. That would be perhaps more comfortable. Maybe if the floor had some soft carpeting, that would have been more comfortable. So, there's really no right or wrong answer. It's just, again, about how we explain why we think this is or is not comfortable. Here, each table has padded chairs around them with high backs. Oh, it has padded chairs with high backs around them. And it's generally more comfortable to eat while seated. However, the floor looks pretty hard. It looks like hard tile with no cushion. And the chairs have no armrests. Well, what else did we say? Oh, we said it was well lit. That kind of weighed in favor of being pretty comfortable, don't we? Also, the restaurant, as noted above, is well lit. So the dining experience would be comfortable on the eyes. But as we said, the floor looks like hard tile with no cushion, and the chairs with no carpet, maybe I should say, and the chairs have no armrests on them. So while it wouldn't be particularly painful to eat at this restaurant, it probably wouldn't win any awards for being remarkably comfortable either. So this restaurant would likely not be considered a comfortable one. All right, so we've got our conclusion now for our comfortable sub-issue. All right, now let's go back and recap. All right, let's come all the way back up to the top and then recap. We were analyzing whether this was a good restaurant. And using our IRAC structure, we then followed with the rule saying that a restaurant is a good restaurant if it has good food, good value, and good atmosphere. All right, so each of these elements must then be individually analyzed. And we'll use the IRAC form for each of those. So first was good food. Good food, we gave the issue in the form of a heading. And then we gave the rule for that. Food is good if it's spicy or healthy. But then our analysis recognized that, well, this again is split up into even smaller sub-issues, spicy or healthy. So then we drilled down even deeper and we gave some more sub-issues, spicy and healthy. And for each of these, we followed the IRAC form. We gave the rule if there is one, but there isn't for spicy or healthy. We then did our analysis explaining why we think this restaurant does or does not have spicy food using the specific facts, and then our conclusion. Same thing for healthy. No rule. We proceed to our analysis that uses the specific facts to explain why this is or is not healthy, and then we give our conclusion. All right. And then we can now zoom back out because now by answering healthy and spicy, we've determined that it does not have good food. So then we move on to the second element of the overall good restaurant rule, which is, does it have good value? Good value does have a rule, so we gave that rule. And then our analysis explains why we think that rule is satisfied, and then we end with our conclusion. On balance, this is probably a good value. And then the last element, good atmosphere. But good atmosphere has a rule. We give that rule, and that rule identifies two sub-issues, clean and comfortable. So we zoom in one more time to give sub-issues, clean and comfortable, each one of those following the IRAC rule once again. We follow the IRAC rule by giving a rule if there is one, but there isn't one. There's no definition for clean that was provided, so we proceed to our analysis using the specific facts to explain why we think this is or is not a clean restaurant, and then we give our conclusion. We do the same thing for comfortable. So now we have to finish this off. We looked at all the three elements of good restaurant. Good food. Does it have good food? No. Good value. Does it have a good value? Yes. And good atmosphere. Well, good atmosphere requires both clean and comfortable. This one we said is not clean and it's not comfortable. So let's tack on here. And because this restaurant is neither clean nor comfortable, it does not have a good atmosphere. And all right, so we said no good food. It does have good value, but not good atmosphere. So on balance, is it a good restaurant? Therefore, this is not a good restaurant. Right? So this is our final conclusion for the overall issue. So this is the structure that we would use in writing out our exam answers. Now, I used a sort of silly example here of a good restaurant, but it's the same approach that we would use if we were trying to analyze torts or contracts or intellectual property or constitutional law, you name it, all right? And I want to share with you one last thing. what I'd like to share with you as a parting note is that we can look at all of this in a format that's going to allow us to see how all of these components fit together, right? There's sort of like a nesting structure of our analyses. So let's walk through this one more time using this little diagram here to see how this was organized. The overall issue is whether this is a good restaurant. Now, I've listed all the rules that we have, which wasn't very many of them, but I've listed them all up here. Okay, now this is just for your own information. Inside the box is what we would actually write on our exam. We're not going to just list all of our rules up front like this. We use the rules in the context of our analysis where we need them. All right. Okay, so is this a good restaurant? That's our issue. The rule says a good restaurant is a restaurant that has good food, good value, and good atmosphere. Our analysis for the good restaurant rule is going to have 3 separate IRACs. One for good food, one for good value, and one for good atmosphere. But some of these IRACs have even more IRACs inside of them, like the one for good food analyzed 2 separate elements, because the good food rule is a disjunctive elements test. Either it's spicy or it's healthy. So we have an IRAC for each of those, spicy and healthy. And I put the rule in brackets here because remember, there was no rule for spicy or healthy. So we just skip over that and we proceed directly to the analysis. And then after we've given a conclusion for each one of those, we can close out the good food IRAC by giving a conclusion. The good value analysis doesn't have any sub-issues. It's a balancing test, not an elements test. And so in our analysis, we simply explain why we think that there is or is not a good balance between price and quantity. We give our conclusion. Good atmosphere does have 2 sub-issues, clean and comfortable. So we have an IRAC for each of those, one for clean, one for comfortable. There's no rule that's given for either one, so we skip over those and we just give our analysis and conclusion. Then we can get a conclusion for whether there's good atmosphere. And once we have a conclusion for good food, good value, and good atmosphere, we can give our conclusion for the overall question of whether this is a good restaurant. All right, so I hope you found this to be helpful. I would suggest that you try practicing this in all of the practice problems that you receive in your classes, because this is the format that you're going to be using on all of your law school exams.